Let's start. All right, well, hello. I'd like to welcome you to FIDE's second annual event. It's such a pleasure to be here. I am Marjan Ehsassi, and I'm based in Washington, D.C., and the new executive director of FIDE North America, which just launched a few weeks ago, largely thanks to many of the colleagues who are actually sitting in this room. I want to welcome each of you in the audience, as well as to say a big hello to our online viewers. The FIDE team has put a great program together for you, and we're excited for the presentations and the discussions of this afternoon. This year's theme is From Votes to Voices. For a few hours, we're asking you to imagine a world where we as citizens are not defined by our power to vote. Rather, we want to spend some time thinking about ways to expand European democracy. And in this context, the program aims at exploring and pushing the boundaries of our existing democratic systems. Instead of a minimalistic definition of democracy defined by a vote every so often, we ask you to think of democracy beyond the ballot box. Deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies enrich and in that process strengthen representative democracies by enabling a democratic culture which is more inclusive, more responsive, and that allows for meaningful engagement with citizens on a consistent basis. Citizens' assemblies allow us to accomplish a lot of different things, from enhanced learning to addressing polarization to building social cohesion and civic muscle. But when they're designed and implemented well, they, one, hold government accountable, they better reflect the preferences of citizens in policy reform, and finally, they bring a far broader diversity of voices to the table. So this afternoon, we invite you to explore these seeds of hope that are being planted in so many different places around the world, from Belgium to Poland to Switzerland, to name just a few. We'll hear the inspiring stories of citizens from citizens who are making a difference across a broad spectrum, all demonstrating that change is possible and that we can do democracy differently. So just to describe the program really quickly, we're going to hear introductory remarks, and then we will have our keynote address. We will then have a panel of citizens' voices, and after that, we're going to break for a coffee break, and there will be 3 different workshops that you can choose to attend around citizens' assemblies and deliberation at the EU level, at the local level, as well as youth assemblies. So you can choose which workshop you would like to join, and then we'll have closing remarks by the President of the French-speaking Parliament of Brussels. And now, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the Executive Director and founder of FIDE Europe, Yves Dejaeghere. I also want to take a moment to add that I've known Yves for several years. And last year, I sat in this very audience and had no idea that 1 year later, we would be launching FIDE North America together. I want to thank Yves for his immense support. I have really appreciated his vision and his thoughtfulness throughout this process. And I'm grateful for FIDE's board as well as FIDE Europe's remarkable team, Miguel, Nabila, and Hannah, who have really helped me every step of the way. So thank you, everybody. Now back to Yves. Yves has worked as a senior researcher in political science at KU Leuven, at the University of Antwerp, and as a guest professor at several universities in Belgium and France. He was also a visiting researcher at Oxford. As a scholar, he has published with international journals on participation in politics, citizenship, elections, and on information processing of elite politicians. From 2018 to 2020, he was the coordinator of Belgium's G1000, an organization that many of you are familiar with and respect a great deal, with expertise in the use of sortition and deliberative democracy. Yves is an expert in the design and implementation of citizens' assemblies, and has provided technical guidance to the European Court of Auditors, the OECD, the European Commission, the list goes on, the Council of Europe, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and a number of local, regional, and national governments. Please help me to welcome Yves.
Thank you. Okay, well, welcome. Dear guests, that's me, but I've been very well introduced. Thank you very much, Marjan. Also, as a lecturer, I never used a microphone. I just yelled at the students, so I'm used to. So, welcome. So it's been less than a year since our last annual event. The reason we only took a few months between the two annual events is, of course, we wanted to anticipate a bit the European elections and the different elections coming up. But even though it's only been a few months rather than a year, a lot is still happening in the deliberative space. We still move at breakneck speed. The number of cities and countries and regions starting or continuing with citizen assemblies is staggering. In some countries, it's even very remarkable. I think, for example, in the Netherlands, a dozen of local authorities in the last year have announced that suddenly they want to start again with deliberative democracy. For the Netherlands, that's a second wave. In 2023, the European citizen panels, for example, really took off in no time. The European Commission organized 3 different panels in the space of a year, whereas this was actually still a very new experience just a few years ago. So things are still moving very fast. And of course, at FIDE, we've tried to keep up and did our best. So what have we done? Well, FIDE only exists for 3 years now. So after those first 3 years, we've actually restructured and expanded internally. Our advisory board has expanded, especially towards Central and Eastern Europe, and diversified. Together, for example, just to name a few things that we did, together with the Bertelsmann Stiftung, we set up a network of civil servants in a number of regions and countries that are at the forefront of this movement, but also civil servants who work in international institutions, European institutions, on citizen participation, to bring them together and to exchange on this fast evolution that we're seeing. Like every year, we organize our schools. So we had 2 very successful schools, one in Milan, one in Helsinki. Hannu is here. We organized one with Citra together. And I think there's some participants from the Milan school who are here who will actually act as speakers. So it's going that fast, isn't it, Che? And we provided expertise when we were demanded to help out. That's also part of what we do. Just recently in Bosnia, 2 citizen assemblies finished, one in Mostar, which was the second one, and one in Banja Luka, which was the first one, supported by the Council of Europe, and where, amongst others, together with our advisory board member, Damir Kapicic, we provided capacity building for civil servants who had to do this work, which was completely new to them. And of course, one of the important steps we've taken is that also there's now a FIDE North America. Now, this is friends from over the pond, I would say, have asked to join the FIDE family and actually want to increase the deliberative wave that is, of course, also happening in North America. North America has actually a very long legacy in this field, and some of the first experiences were in North America. Amongst others, we'll mark now the 20 years since the British Columbia Citizen Assembly, which was actually the first, let's say, modern citizen assembly commissioned by a government. For those of you who are in the network, Democracy R&D will celebrate this by being organized in Vancouver. That's our global assembly of people working around deliberative democracy. So a lot of good organizations have kept that North American flame awake, and FIDE North America will act as a convener to strengthen and support these actors. Now, we'll have a first school also in a few weeks in Washington, D.C., and that will be actually the first real thing that FIDE North America will organize, so very much looking forward to that. So, I have a symbolic picture here. Jacques Delors died this year. For those who are not as old as I am, he was the head of the European Commission and was known for his kind of legacy as Mr. Europe of being very ambitious. I don't want to go into, he probably also did a number of things that one could criticize, but he was known for somebody who would push the idea that Europe could do things and should be ambitious. And on hearing that he had deceased, I actually remember I did an interview with Jacques Delors when I was a young student working for our student newspaper. And I was very, timid. He had just finished his work as a commissioner, so he had retired by that time. And actually what struck me, looking back at that interview when I read it, is at that time, the EU and all the questions from the audience, from all the students, were critical. This was just before the expansion towards the East. Again, I'm that old. And the questions were, will the EU survive this? Will the EU collapse economically, taking these countries in? People had questions about nuclear reactors in Slovakia that were not up to date and would threaten our security. Reading this paper again, you actually see that Europe has always confronted a lot of issues. The difference, one could say, was that there was a sort of sense in how he reflected to all these critical questions with a positive idea that Europe should actually be ambitious and just try to tackle these things. So a bit in that spirit, rereading that, I would say, with all that the EU is now looking at, a new enlargement is looming. Yes, there is the war in Ukraine. Climate change is a challenge for us all. Social inequality is rising, and I mean, there's farmers at the moment burning some hay just a few 100 meters from here. So there's challenges enough. So I would call to regain a bit of ambition, and of course in our field that means ambition to bring citizens in. I know Europe is already doing a number of things, but we need to also regain ambition in not being just content with a first step. We need more steps. This means in the scale, we need to call for even stronger, more ambitious, longer assemblies. Yes? And I keep repeating myself, I said this last year, also about funding. Yes? We have been calling for the funding of citizen participation for a long time, and we've been part of this project, Democratic Action Fund, where we call for governments to invest a little percentage of what they give to elections into citizen participation. Because at the moment, there are places that want to organize citizen assemblies but don't have funding. And I can tell you, without going into detail who or what, even people who work in national governments have called us and they want to set up a deliberative process. Their minister is okay with it, and then they'll ask us, do you know a private foundation that has money to fund this? Yes? This should not be the case. There should be ambition in funding citizen participation. This should be as normal as funding elections. Yes? And then finally, we need evaluations and standards that somehow or in some way set a sort of international standard for what is a good deliberation. Of course, every citizen assembly is a bit different depending on the topic. There is no kind of pure uniform way to do this, but we know there are a number of standards out there that we should actually call upon to be followed, because at some point otherwise we will have assemblies that are watering down what actually deliberative democracy can mean, and we should be ready to confront with an increasing success and an increasing visibility and increasing scrutiny. Because actually we've been working a bit in the shadows. Yes? We've sometimes complained we didn't get enough media attention, but we should also be ready when media attention comes. This was The Guardian, which is, I think, one of the most read English language newspapers, just last week. And we could be happy that citizen assemblies are amongst the top 10 of most read pieces in The Guardian, and I don't want to go into the specifics of a referendum tied to a citizen assembly, but just the fact that scrutiny will be there. Yes, journalists will start maybe becoming a bit more critical and write these types of, fiasco puts future of lauded citizens' assemblies in doubt. It's not something that warms our hearts, but it's also a warning call that we need to be ready for more scrutiny with more visibility. Now, I have a few minutes left. I actually, this year, want to call a bit of our attention to an actor we've been maybe neglecting a little bit, and I'll tie it to the place where we are now. It is the bureaucracy. Yes? Actually, as deliberative scholars, first of all, in the first wave, we just wanted these things to happen. And then in a second step, we thought about, okay, we need to tie them to representative institutions. So we've given a lot of attention. How do we tie this to a parliament, a city council, but there's actually a third very important actor we all know. It is civil servants and the bureaucracy. And just this little story is how far we've come. This place, this region of Brussels is called Les Marolles. It's still an area with 1/3 of social housing. It's always known to be a poor working class neighborhood, a neighborhood with immigration, people going in and out, but also people who kicked power a bit against the chins if they felt like it. One of the traumas of this neighborhood is that in the end of the 19th century, like in many countries, at some point, a palace of justice needed to be built, and the ambition was to build the biggest building in the world. It's actually, you can't miss it. And so they flattened half of the Marolles and just told people to shove it and go away. So this experience lingered very strongly when in the 1960s, people again got a letter saying the rest of the Marolles was going to be flattened to build tower blocks, amongst others for the archives of the biggest building in the world, apparently not big enough. And so at that point, the people of the Marolles had enough, and together with a sort of haphazard community group that included young Catholic priests that were socially engaged, left-wing 1960s agitators, and just local everyday people from the Marolles in the bars with an accordion, they formed a sort of haphazard coalition and withstood not the politicians, but in their eyes, the bureaucracy. Their enemy was le bureaucrate. And actually, they performed just on the street uphill from here, de Rue Haute, a funeral procession for le promoteur, the building promoter, and his wife, the bureaucracy. And to warn everybody who would still have a plan, actually this plaque still stands, the citizens of the Marolles put together money to put up a plaque near the Palais de Justice to warn every bureaucrat that would come again with big plans for their neighborhood. It's in French, but so it's a remembrance plaque for the Battle of the Marolles, 1969. They won. And it says, here lies buried le promoteur, the building promoter, and his trusted wife, the bureaucracy, that would always work for the building promoter in their head. And it says, concession à perpétuité, buried here forever. Of course, we have come a long time. And I must say, for the few people here working at the European Commission, this might not sound as a strange view of how they are perceived by some of their critics. And a lot has changed, and a lot of the work that citizen assemblies do will at some point land on the table of the bureaucracy. Civil servants that are not engaged in citizen participation but try to make policy, that are experts in their own field, yes, and that will need to work with that type of work. And what we need to really focus upon is that we need to engage and prepare also the bureaucracy and civil servants that are not core to what we do, but that are core to, for example, climate policy, energy policy, mobility. Because if these people don't feel motivated by working with this dossier, these citizen recommendations that suddenly land on their desk, you might pass the city council or the parliament with your recommendations. They might still somewhere die in commission, as it is called. So we need to really get these civil servants engaged and gain a more citizen-oriented bureaucracy. Of course, one of the things we always try to do is organize schools for civil servants, but we only do 60 at a time. So the next one is in Budapest. So we really need to think as a community how to bring these people in. And of course, finally, and then my time is almost done, we're in a year of elections. Now, the deliberative field is sometimes stereotypically characterized as being against elections, against elected politicians. Well, speaking for FIDE, I can only say I can admire and encourage citizens who are still willing to stand for election. It has become a very dirty job, and it's not a fun job. I think we have a few people here who are elected in the room. So as long as, of course, these are people standing for parties that uphold Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union. Yes, it is human rights, democracy, rule of law, and minority rights. But we need these people. These are the people we lobby to try to do something with citizen assemblies. So we need good people to stand for elections. But democracy in Europe is under pressure. And so together with Democracy International, here present Daniela Vancic from Democracy International, in a few weeks' time, FIDE will launch a pledge campaign where we will call upon candidates for the European Parliament to sign a pledge to actually support increased European support for democratic innovation, citizen participation, for stronger ways of funding citizen participation, but also strong international standards to uphold citizen participation. So I hope when you will see this pass in a few weeks, you will be there to support us in this pledge and try to get a European Parliament that is even more civic-oriented than it is now. Thank you very much, and I wish you a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Yves. Oops. Thank you, Yves. Thank you so much for those insightful comments. I love the historical references and the footage. And now it is an honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Jakub Wygnanski, if I may, known as Kuba. Kuba has led a truly inspiring life. There is so much to say about Kuba that I'm going to try and keep it brief so that we can have more time to hear from Kuba about his impactful work. Since the late 1980s, Kuba has been tirelessly working to support and enable an active citizen sector in Poland. Over these decades, he has helped transform an environment that was ill-equipped to help civil society into a resilient ecosystem that supports evolving bottoms-up change. His work focuses on building legal and institutional infrastructures for change, shifting the mindset of citizens to be active participants and creating resilient social capital among citizen sector leaders. Moreover, by encouraging bottom-up leadership, he is creating the space for social entrepreneurship and social innovation. Kuba founded the Association of the Forum of Non-Governmental Organizations, which connected CSOs and through their annual and regional convenings. For the first time, Polish civil society sector was able to collectively discuss urgent topics and create coordinated advocacy platforms. To further build the ecosystem for CSOs, Kuba believed an integrated platform for communication was necessary, and in 1998, he launched an online platform that, as of 2017, this platform has 3.9 million unique users, representing about 10% of Polish population. For his work, Kuba has received the Knight's Cross in 2001, the Officer's Cross in 2011, the Order of Polonia Restituta from the President of the Republic of Poland, and the Tishner Prize. Please help me in welcoming Kuba to the floor. Thank you.
As you can see, I'm a man of many talents, which I was not aware. Thanks Yves, for inviting me. I don't have slides. Time, okay. Sometimes it's helped me, sometimes not. Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. It is risky business. I hope you will not regret this. And in your invitation, you mentioned, I mean, yeah, I can't believe that this year I will turn 60, which means, oh my God, there's a long time. There's a long time. So you were very kind mentioning my different efforts, mainly in the field of a non-profit organization, civil society organization. Although, as you all know, civil society is not that simple to say that it's simply a group of organizations. It's much more complex idea in a sense, but it's true. I spent or lost 20-some years basically to furnish this kind of environment for working of civil society organization, legislation, taxation, all those synthetic forms to increase the speed of appearing of a real civil society. And I'm using it because I want to talk about time. And there, I bet you don't know that because you are not from that part of the world. In terms of time, there was a famous, I think there are two proverbs I remember from the 1989. That time I was young. I was the youngest participant of the roundtable talks as a student, where there's this kind of shifting power from the communist government to citizens, if you like. And on that time, more or less, there are two prophets. One is very well known, and I think Fukuyama, it does not deserve all this critic, because it was much more complex, but people understand history has ended. You remember that the history has ended, that his concept of the, everything is kind of done, if you like. So that it's asymptotic. Basically, wait another 2 generations, and we will all park in this kind of a liberal democracy world globally. He was wrong. The second guy he died a few years ago, was Ralph Dahrendorf, sociologist, German origin, and he wrote a piece exactly in 1989, more or less this way. The quotation is not, but it keeps the main point. Process of building civil society has 3 parts. The first one is 6 months. So you can build an institution. In a sense, you can write a legislation, for example, that you have political parties, trade unions, whatever, and you can vote. 6 years is needed to rebuild the market, if you want. Obviously, it was about our region. And you need 60 years to rebuild civil society, which was from the very beginning kind of a tough thing. But anyway, that was just to wait. And that's, in both cases, both were wrong in a sense. And I think it's, I'm a sociologist, not a philosopher, but I like to play with those concepts. And I'm writing very often about only, and for several years, on the things which are triangle. I've never, of those things which are triptych, triangles, trilemmas, etc. I like it. And I think that to start with, the very interesting concept, the three Greek concept of time. One is chronos. Do not confuse with the Kronos who is eating his own kids. Chronos, it's like a chronometer. And he represents that time which cannot be stopped. Even gods cannot do anything with that. Basically, it's rolling and rolling and rolling. The second one is aion, which is basically the circular concept of time. Again, so you can say the seasons, being young and old, and many, many other elements which might be circular in a sense. And that is more frightening because the first one was just, you cannot do nothing. With the circles, that was, I think, already 15, 20 years ago. I think many people have this kind of a doubt whether history has ended. No. It accelerates and it wants to go in the circles. And those circles might be different. But since last 5-10 years, you have 5 years ago, I would say the mentioning of Weimar Republic and its collapse was like unpolite even. I don't think, and I think it's actually very good in a sense of comparison, the fall of the Weimar Republic and what happened afterwards. I think history is cyclical. History is cyclical, and I think the reason I'm here is that we have a sudden kind of a surge of the soft power of Poles because we're able not a few months ago to basically reject the government in the electoral process with the electoral turnout of 80%, which is, kind of unheard of. We surprise ourselves. It seems like a kind of a contradictory, but you can surprise yourself. It's not the first time that Poles are surprising themselves, in a sense. We don't know what is the magic sauce. We hope we would know. I think probably a lot of many, small streams, including really last hours of the election with many young people say, okay, we have to be part of that fiesta. They were standing in the front of in the big cities, in the front of the voting booths for the 3 a.m., for example. Nobody's going to tell me that they didn't make the decision the very day. So anyway, we did it, if you like. The previous government was basically hoping and praying for what they say, we need the Budapest in Warsaw. We need a Budapest. I was not that keen on this idea of having a Budapest in Warsaw, but I think in many countries in this region, they believe that maybe we know the secret sauce how to make Warsaw in a Budapest, if you like. And I think history might look different. Even me being really young, I was a part of the kind of a journalistic kind of an interview with people who came from states. It was a book, Rebirth of Civil Society in Central Eastern Europe. There are several people with whom they talk and make an interview. In Poland, I was one of them. In Hungary, it was, guess who? Viktor Orban himself. So it also proved that, those trajectories might be very, very, in a sense, complex, if you like. But this concept of history is going in the circles. For some people, you have to be a bit, not the cynical, but kind of having a distance to say, okay, it's very Central Eastern European. If it's wrong, it will be better. So, you go on a pendulum. So you can even find a kind of a philosophical kind of a comfort of saying, okay, it will be better one day. The problem with the circular time is that what we see right now, it's a very new element of not the end of history, but end of time. In a sense, I think all of, especially young people here, including myself, I have 3 kids. The question is how many circles we have. I don't think we have that many circles. So you have all, in the same moment, a lot of emotion, almost hysteric emotions to say, what are we gonna do? We trapped ourselves. And that kind of a fear, that kind of emotion of end of time, I think is something which is this kind of a mix, if you so, this meeting of two stars, if you like, is very unique. The concept of circularity was also in Poland. I think Madeleine Albright, she wrote in the last book, she quoted Primo Levi. Primo Levi on this, it was on a very kind of a powerful quote. Primo Levi said, every generation has to go through its own fascism. He was trying to say that history has teach nothing. Basically, you have to go through it yourself. So those kind of cycles were really, in a sense, horrifying, in a sense. But Greeks have also the third type of a time, and that's what I want. This is the only one in which we have some kind of agency, if you like. It's called kairos. I don't know whether, if you write a kairos, probably you say there is a spa or something like that. Kairos is a very unique concept, it's a moment. Its portrait, if you Google or something, you could see a different thing. It's a very strange person. He's always on the run. He looks like a Hermes. He always has a balance. And what is the most characteristic, in kind of a freaky, he has a long hair here and he's completely bald here. The concept of this in Greek, although they think the past, they reverse things, but anyway, was either you catch that guy up front in the moment, or you basically say hello because you cannot grab it by hair. So the concept is this moment. And in life you have a lot of moments of that time. You say, that was that moment. So everything for kind of basically having a fortune to the historical time. So kairos is probably the time which is the most, I think, for me at least, interesting concept. And I think we are right now, I mean, I'm defining for myself, we are in this very moment, in this kind of almost, I don't know, what is the word for in English? Anyway, like a threshold, like a borderline moment in a sense. And I think it's the same with our hopes for democracy. I have to switch to, kind of a not more less global, more Polish story on that. But it is, I think, a very important moment also for the democracy, which also proves itself. And probably on that room, nobody is that naive to see democracy. I myself have a lot of doubts whether to protect democracy or run away. Because democracy without efforts, democracy built on a kind of a lack of a concept that are things bigger than us, basically suicidal. And this concept of democracy which needs effort, which needs thinking, capacity to understand, capacity to compromise, and many other things, effortless democracy are basically dangerous. I have last time I was in Brussels, somebody was saying, I was saying, no, you like liberal democracy, but there is historical concept of a totalitarian democracy. Some people say, no, it's internally in a sense, contradictory, but it's not. Unfortunately, it's not. So here we come to the question of what kind of democracy, and I'm a big proponent and I'm a big believer in deliberative democracy, which it's bad. No, but anyway, so that I consumed on the introduction that a big part of this. So I would rather skip things. I would be very happy to say more about Poland, which probably for you might be almost exotic. On the Roman maps there was the ubi leones, slaves, Slavs. But Poland has a very, for those who know a little about the Polish history, has a very strong democratic experience. From the 16th century, we were basically, electing kings. We were, doing a very different thing, including a consensual base. The biggest, I think, a consensus conference you can imagine is a Polish nobility having those Sejms, those parliament. It was always decided 43 days. And there was no way you can leave that room without the consensus. That brings basically disaster for that, because this concept of liberum veto, one person being able to reject everything, was obviously catastrophe for us, and it cost us partition of Poland and many other things. Although we were able to write the second constitution in the world in 1791. Then you have those different, times, and several miracles, which might be somehow connected with this democratic momentum. The first one is solidarity in 1980. obviously. We surprised many people, including ourselves, obviously. The reason I'm mentioning is that because just 4 weeks before tanks were on the street, there was something which is very often skipped, document which is called the Rzeczpospolita Samorządna, Self-Governing Republic. And the reason I'm mentioning is because it was created through the system of not election, but delegates. There were mainly people from the big factories working for 12 months almost to have this kind of a collective dream of Poland. And there were 700 people, delegates, who were able in Gdańsk, actually, not in Warsaw, to vote that thing. Then you have in 89, obviously, the roundtables, election, those kind of things. So I think sometimes we were able to add something to that repertoire, if you like, of democratic achievements. Although, what I want to say is that this choices is a complicated thing. So I will simply go to the last several years. More or less 20 years ago, that was obvious for me and many other people that this concept of the democracy basically based on the representation through institutions, it's not efficient enough. I remember, so even in Poland, we have things which we distinguish the social dialogue, which is basically trade unions and those employees. Second, which we called civic dialogue, and that was my work, basically to bring NGOs to the table and to say, you cannot forget about consumers or ecology or something. But then, recently, we discovered there is that third thing, demos. So what we call it, basically, we call it public consultation, although you can name differently. But basically, it's jumping, that's the big thing. Because this kind of a concept of asking, in a sense, regular people, randomly selected people, has to be established as a node that something which disqualifies other forms of dialogue or democracy, direct democracy or representative democracy. It has to be, again, in a triangle. And I think that's one of the biggest political work we have to do, is not to say everything from bureaucrats to elected officials, we have better ideas. We have to make it complementary. So more or less 20 years ago, we started to work on the civic participation concept and the Shipyard, if you have more time, although we are very weak on the English side of that. But anyways, there was something which we can call the field building. You will be surprised because we were not very active in the kind of presenting it outside. But Poland, you might, because we are not on those maps again, ubi leones, believe it or not, in Poland, first participatory budget was 10 years ago. Right now, every city in Poland of a certain size, so we have every year 350 participatory budgeting in every city. We have, I think right now, 18 civic panels which are local. We did several public hearings on this kind of, mainly on the universities during the previous government, trying to, basically to establish that mechanism. And right now, and that's how we met, and I'm very grateful because after election, the first call we made was to you and your friends, because we made a year ago, we concluded maybe somehow similar to G1000, bottom-up civic panel on the national level about the energy poverty. We have our spécialité de la maison in Poland, which is that it's not only people who were selected in this kind of a random procedure, although in Poland it was horrible, 113,000 phone calls. But anyway, we were able to make the thing, but we also do a lot of the conversation in local areas. That's I think, the main thing, that we talk with people locally. We don't still know what is the chemistry, exactly what is this kind of a connection between the local conversation, but we had a massive conversation on education, shortage of water recently, or the question of energy poverty. We're trying to combine something which is, in a sense, empowered by the massive participation, so we talk big numbers. And the other, which is based on this kind of orthodoxy of selection, if you know. Now it's like a Chinese proverbs, like last 100 days, because we changed the government. A lot of activists appear to be in the government. And they open the whole kind of a box with their demands on the participation. We are a bit frightened, but we have a lot of friends. But there are not naive things. One is a public media, for example. Because we have a promise to have a second after island, this permanent chamber in the Polish parliament. We have to find a good topic. We have to train people, which is important. We don't want to, Shipyard is providing know-how, but we do as fast as possible want to provide them with that knowledge to the people who work in the parliament to solve that thing. The same on the government. We have, I'm simply saying what I see in my agenda. We have, for example, political promise of the current government. We will establish 20% of the forestry regions in Poland out of this, cutting procedure, if you like. 1/3 of country in Poland is basically forest. But imagine how you're going to work in the local areas with people who are very different, from the people who work, hunt, making furniture or love birds, whatever. So that's, how you're going to make the 1.5 million hectares to cut from the, so that is a huge participatory process. Probably the biggest one, and that's bring me to the unexpected end in the sense that it's not enough time, is that I think what is in front of us is, there are big questions and tough questions. Like, for example, right now, draft. Whether Poland will decide to reestablish a draft, not only for men, but also for women, kind of a obligatory service in a different form. That we need a social contract for that. Retirement age, immigration policy, all those big things which cannot be decided just by politicians. So the territory is huge. I believe in the panel for, I think, again, probably not to convince you, but I was looking to it, trying to understand what it really does. And I think it has, in this kind of current shape of democracy, which is on the edge, I think what it should be presented that way. Today we had a meeting with some people from the parliament. How politicians can see that thing, not as a kind of a nice toy to have, but why it's so relevant. It's obviously retro innovation. It was not invented here, not in Belgium. It's old as a democracy. And again, it's for another lecture, but I'm studying very carefully, all those things. But the subject of the thing might be direct also in a very, as you for sure the Athenians, they basically randomly selected people. Decisions they made was very often about war. So for them, decision basically was, we are going to war. And as you might know, and you probably know from those pictures, that they were deliberating a lot. On the war, that was something which has this famous Greek falanga or Macedonian falanga. You know how it looks. It's a basically block of people. Helmets are organized in a way that you don't see the other thing because you completely rely on your partners here. So they were able to switch from this kind of, if you like, deliberative democracy, talking, to the action which is completely organized in a very different mode, if you like. And I think, I don't want to be hysteric here, but we as but it is the decision in front of us. And there we know it's so nice to have a deliberation on what kind of demands you want. The problem is right now that we need much tougher decision of what we are going to protect and what we are ready to sacrifice. So it's a very different concept of democracy, like to please everyone. It's very different, and I think we have to make it collectively. So I believe the panel has a power because it's, first of all, it's for me the only way which is not based on a manipulation or basically bribing people to go through the very difficult decision. Politicians are winning election not talking to people about things they should know, but the things they would like to hear, in a sense. And that's obvious, but this politics, this kind of a politics, is extremely dangerous. So everything from retirement age to joining the army, I think that's a very different question, if you like. So I believe the panel has this power. Second, it's I was running almost through the Brussels because you have so many violent tractors. We also have it in Poland. But there is a big question whether, how to protect democracy from the situation where the very vocal minorities basically hijacking and not giving a voice to silent minority. And I believe actually the panel is the way to bring common sense. Because if you obviously know better than me, and you ask kind of a self-selection people of what they think about the certain issues, basically the outcome is more or less like this. If you talk with people and you give them a time, educate them, and try them kind of a moment of reflection, conversation, etc., it's much more, in a sense, in the best possible sense, common sense. Common sense. It's not stupid. It's a common sense. It's much more kind of a balance. So I think it's important. I think it's protected more and more. I think about the artificial intelligence. I think God help us not too late understand what is the value of organic conversation with all the obstacles. But I think the only guarantee that you talk to person will be sooner or later will be the fact that you see each other and you talk in a small group. Last not least, I think it's in the politics we run right now, it is a kind of a prohibitor of a extreme level of a self-selection. And I think that might be altogether create, I don't know, is a panacea, but I believe we should think not only us, but also politicians about it seriously. So my kind of rather address to you and all of you guys is how to, because one thing is a wave, more and more and more and more, like with this participatory budgeting. The question is how to, in a sense, switch from the quantity, if you like, to the quality, which I mean not only orthodoxy on selecting people, but the quality, I mean, really decision-making power, which is always this kind of a thing, that it's nice to know what you think, but how to make the thing. So I think for all of us, the question is how to bring that thing almost as seriously as you have an electoral process to say, okay, there are certain situations when you go for this procedure, it has to be codified in the sense that it has to follow the rules. Although elections might be different in different countries, but to treat it seriously and to say there is a really kind of a voice, that would be banal. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I think it would be an absolute shame to hear all these your incredible analysis and some of your provocative statements without allowing the audience to ask at least 2 questions. So please, if you do have questions, we have time to take 2 questions and then we can move to our panel. If anybody has a question and you'd like to raise your hand, thank you. Any questions? No? Mm-hmm. Kalvin here. Thank you. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. You mentioned the illiberal democracy, but you didn't elaborate on. You said that it exists, and the conversation we had a couple of months ago, I was on the other side of the argument where I said it's a contradiction in terms. So I'd like to hear why
if I only knew
you think. No.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate, please? Thank you.
Yes, I think the democracy. I think it's okay, not in a sense that the people in a democratic, like a society of cannibals will basically make eating other people as a constitutional right, if you like. Democracy, I mean, I don't want to go to but for sure you know this kind of Aristotelian concept, and he has his bad and good regimes, if you like. It's very interesting. The one axis is on how many people or what is the instance. It might be one person, that might be group, or that might be all of us in the sense, obviously with all those kind of, who is all in Greek Athens. And the other axis, if you like, is whether it's for me or for that group or for the public, if you like. So there are nice things, and on this left side you have a tyranny and monarchy. Obviously he was for monarchy. On the left side you have an oligarchy and aristocracy. On the third you have a democracy and politeia, which is almost not used in that. And what he said, basically that's this distinction, that the demos might be translated to almost a mob, a crowd, or something. And he said himself, problem with democracy is, oligarchy is the government by few who are rich. Democracy is a problem that's is a rule of all who are poor. It's not mean literally poor, but people who are dependent, with whom you can basically doing business. So I think there's a constant moment of shifting from democracy to politeia, which is basically the same. But the assumption is, that's what I mean, that this is effortless. This is a clientistic in a sense. Where politeia needs at least some people who sacrifice a lot sometimes to basically make this kind of a judgment, think, and be responsible in the sense of And there's always problem with the free evening. I think Oscar Wilde's right, the socialism will not work because it demands too many free evenings. But it's not only with the socialism, but I believe the concept of totalitarian democracy is not mine. It's well established in literature, basically people making that, and you know, we can talk about what's happened after Weimar Republic. This is actually critical element, right, for us. There will be, and that I can say it in a secret, although I know that the part of the Polish presidency is Belgian presidency, now it's Hungary, I don't know what will be a topic, but I might say unofficially that for sure in the Polish presidency, the question of a kind of a blend of the question of security, which is absolutely fundamental for us, how it's related to the concept of social resilience, preparedness, etc. Because we are in a phase of militarizing societies. And the question is whether civil society is perceived as the source of weakness. You know, Socrates was thinking that the Sparta he was not keen on democracy, but he said Sparta exported to Athens so to make us weak. So the question for us, with all this protecting democracy, is the question whether actually plural society can be a source of strength as opposed, and that is exactly the end of Weimar Republic. Carl Schmitt, who wrote the thing, he said, okay, basically our tolerance means I don't care. I'm not going to die for you. And his concept, obviously, he was major lawyer of fascism to the end. He never jumped out from that thing. Was basically democracies are nice, but completely weak. And the question is, and it's in front of us. And I can elaborate a lot on the Moscovians, not even Russians, because they also, some people might know that in the 15th century, Russia has a Wielki Novgorod, which was like a Hanseatic city. It was actually, they randomly select people. And during and they call it historically consolidation of the of Russia. They basically swallow the Wielki Novgorod. But even in the DNA of the Russian history, which cannot exist other than being an empire, and they had a lot of time to invent them in the other way, but they are not able so. So anyway, I don't know why I came here. But it's, again, democracy. A friend of mine who was for many years living, and he was in love with Russians. And he's so much right now kind of fall apart. And he said, you know what? There's a Russian saying, but I cannot say it in Russian. People are not following Putin. Putin is following people. And this is always this question, who is making, whether the tyrants, whether slaves or other way around. So you have a great inquisitor and Dostoevsky and this kind of a confusion that if you were asked, we would rather select not freedom, but the safety and what?
Kuba, you answered the first and the second question. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kuba. We're going to move to our Citizens' Voices panel. If I can ask Manon, Frank, and Pépin to join me on stage, please. Please come. There are steps up there if you'd like. The microphones are right here. There you go. All right, well, let us continue. Thank you so much to the three of you for being with us. The Citizens' Voices panel is really an opportunity for us to bring together a very, very active and engaged citizen along with another very active citizen and also an elected representative to talk about deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies. And we're going to start with Manon. Our first speaker is Manon Boissat. Manon is deeply engaged to gender equality and diversity. She's engaged at the intersection of social work and science and has a keen interest in societal biases, particularly those created by artificial intelligence models. Manon is a data scientist, graduated from EPFL, where she was involved in representing the 12,000 students on campus. Her role was to advocate on behalf of students' interests to the school management. She was recently appointed to the selection committee for the recruitment for the next EPFL president. She's very, very involved in several scientific projects and has notably developed a deep learning model capable of detecting precancerous and cancerous lesions of cervical cancer, a tool that's going to be deployed in Cameroon. In 2021, she was elected to participate in the Women's Session, an assembly organized in 2021 at the Federal Parliament to address issues related to equality. There, she defended the motion to integrate the gender perspective into digital technology, which has now been accepted by the Swiss National Council and must now be accepted by the Federal Council. In 2023, she took part in the Future Council, a youth assembly on mental health in Switzerland. Manon, thank you for being here. If I could first start by asking you that besides this democratic lottery that you, of course, were part of, you have been very, very engaged. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the democracy and sort of democratic participation before your engagement in the Citizens at the Youth Council?
Well, thank you for this entire description. I don't know, well, I grew up in France. I spent 19 first years of my life in France. And I think that before coming to Switzerland, I had pretty much no relationship with democracy. Basically, I was a bit passive. I didn't know how exactly everything worked as a citizen. I basically voted for the president, voted for the National Assembly, but that was it. And then I came to Switzerland 7 years ago, and it was a really smaller country compared to France. And I realized, okay, whoa, people here vote, have a right to say things. And then as I was engaged in women's rights and in gender equality in general, I decided to engage in this women's session. And this is where I really realized that I can have an impact. Okay, the political sphere is accessible and I can talk to people. Like last week I wrote a message to a national councillor and he replied, and I was like, okay, then it is possible. But in general, I would say that my relationship with democracy relies on the fact that once I got proactive and I realized I could have an impact, then there was a breach and I could enter, but it should be the other way around, and political stakeholders should reach out to the population instead of the population reaches out to the political sphere.
Thank you for that. There are lots of people in the audience, Manon, who are working with youth. And I wonder if you can help us, based on the fact that you've had experience in deliberative democracy and as well as lots of participatory platforms, what are some of the strategies that you think are especially impactful in getting youth interested, engaged, and then continuously engaged?
Well, I don't know whether there is a predefined strategy that works all the time. I think that concerning democracy, the huge lack that we have today is communication. Youth is lacking of trust in all this system, basically because there is a lack of direct link between this political sphere and the citizens. And specifically on the deliberative processes that I've been through with the youth assembly, I feel like there is this need of communication, there is this need of clear and clear-sighted vision of the process, of how it's going to work, what are the expectations, what is going to be the output, is there going to be a report, how are we going to reach out to the political sphere. But also, there is a need of empowerment. When we received the letter that we have been selected, I was like, oh wow, I have a responsibility, I need to write those recommendations. And I think this is the most important. When I talked to other members that were selected in this process, there were plenty of reactions. Some said that they were curious about the system, this is why they came, or interested in politics, or they wanted to change the world, or they felt that they endorsed this responsibility. And I think those reactions are really important, and we should react and take these reactions into account so that we have a strategy that works.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Let's turn now to Frank. Frank Sukas. Frank is a resident of Aachen. He's an electrician by profession and was not at all engaged, I understand, in politics or even a member of a political party until recently. And then everything changed when I think around 2020, you started learning about citizens' assemblies by way of the experience in Ireland, in Oost-Belgium. And since then, Frank, together with other residents of Aachen, has been committed to bringing deliberative democracy and citizens' councils to Aachen and doing democracy differently. So Frank, thank you first of all for being with us. We're really looking forward to hearing sort of about your very inspiring journey into deliberative democracy. And if I could ask you first, the Citizens' Council of Aachen started as a grassroots movement. Can you tell us a little bit about how that demand started building?
Thank you for being here. It started in 2019, exactly, as a small discussion format in a part of Aachen. We found it with a few friends, and the targets of the evenings was to get people connected and talk over some topics. Mm-hmm. There was no need to get an output. It was only for this evening. And in this format, we found connect to the Ireland assemblies and to the East Belgian parties, and it was so interesting that we said this is the next logical step. We have to put the discussions, the connecting the people, the different bubbles together, and we can form some output which will lead into recommendations we can give to the politicians, and then we hope to make the urban society a little bit stronger. We've heard that democracy is in a really strange situation, and we have to connect the people, and this is one of our forms.
Thank you for that. And if you wouldn't mind also sharing with us, many of us who do this work, we face a lot of skepticism and a lot of resistance from elected representatives, and I'm guessing that you've also had your share of having to deal with that kind of reaction from elected representatives. Can you share perhaps with us some of the resistance that you have experienced?
To get a reaction, you have to talk with people. So soon we saw that we can't get it in our home to put some development in Aachen. We had to get in contact with the parties, with the political parties, with the administration, and we right in the first steps we did go to different political parties and explained them our idea. We said we've got a rather new format for Aachen. We want to develop this thing, and we have to. This is our idea, and it was not only to explain them. It was in front the idea to get feedback from the party, so we could see there the conflicts, and we put it in our request. And so the time we did our request to the political parties in the town hall, there was also the ideas from the political in there. Mm. So yes, there are struggles, and there are just today's struggles, but it was the only way to get in contact and in communication so we can understand each other, and so the politicians did know what we want.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Frank. And now, last but not least, moving to Pepin Kennis, I also just want to note that we will have some time to take some questions from the audience, so please have your questions ready for after Pepin shares his thoughts with us. But Pepin is a member of the Brussels Parliament. He's passionate about collectively making cities better. He obtained a master's degree in urban studies from the universities in Brussels, Vienna, Copenhagen, and Madrid. And he then coordinated Taustand, a not-for-profit organization that turned abandoned spaces into community spaces. Currently, as I said, he's a member of the Brussels Parliament representing Agora Brussels, a citizens movement promoting the idea of permanent citizens' assemblies with equivalent power to Parliament. His role is to defend the decisions taken by citizens' assemblies, organized by the movement, to showcase the potential of citizens' decision-making and to push for institutionalization. I met Pepin 3 years ago when I was in Brussels researching the Deliberative Committee on Homelessness, and we had a fascinating conversation that turned into an interview that he allowed me to do with him. So, Pepin, I'll ask you first. Agora Brussels was founded with the goal of enriching the democratic process beyond traditional elections. Can you just share with us a little bit about, over the years, what are some of the most significant impacts that you have seen as a result of this work?
Sure, I'd love to. And thanks for having me as well.
Thank you.
With Agora, we basically started, I suppose, a bit like Frank did, with a bunch of people thinking about, hey, could we not improve the way democracy works in Brussels? We were inspired notably by this book from a Belgian writer, Against Elections, which is a bit of a provocative title, but it mainly advocates for deliberative democracy rather than against anything, but it sells better. And we were quite quickly sold on the idea, let's have like a permanent citizens' assembly in Brussels. And so we tried to put that on the agenda. We tried to put that on the agenda by contacting different parties in the wake of the elections of 2019, which we had here. And we asked them how enthusiastic they would be about having a permanent assembly that would be binding with its decisions. And not to our surprise, political parties were not too keen on letting go of the power they have. I mean, they have so little power. They don't want to let it go. It's true, though. In Parliament, there's only that much you can decide. Well, let's not get into too many things at the same time. But yes, the idea was, okay, there's not much enthusiasm. Let's run for office ourselves. So we got this one seat in Parliament, which allows us to, to organize citizens' assemblies ourselves, and me to defend their ideas in Parliament, and to strive for a permanent installation of it. I think because of the mere fact that we obtained this seat, we put deliberative democracy on the agenda. 3,629 people, if memory serves correctly, voted not for their preference for a party, but voted for another system. Voted for other randomly selected Brussels people to have their say in politics, and therefore voted for their trust in citizens rather than their trust in parties. And that sort of awakened a little bit, marginally maybe, but still the political class of Brussels. And so quite soon, the Parliament adopted the idea of lowering the threshold for petitions, but also institutionalizing deliberative committees. And I think, well, you've assisted one. We've definitely not come up with that idea, but we've definitely, I think, helped make that happen, that randomly selected citizens from Brussels today can ask, or people from Brussels can ask that randomly selected people sit with elected members of Parliament and together make policy proposals. So I think that's something that we've acquired and that we helped acquire. However, it's still a bit marginal in a way that it's on the fringe of policymaking. Mm-hmm. Whatever comes out of these deliberative committees are policy recommendations that certainly are voted, but they sort of float somewhere in the big sphere of political influence. And I'm not saying they don't have any political influence, but they're not binding. And I think if we really want to get further, and maybe from a North American perspective, it's great what's happening in Brussels, but at the same time, I see also the risks in that. And I think if we really want to get like steps further to more inclusive democracy, we need to put the agenda setting in hands of citizens and not elected representatives. Mm-hmm. And we need to put the follow-up also in citizens' hands and make it more binding and not just have that float around somewhere.
Thank you for that. So can I ask you to maybe further elaborate a little bit on the policy piece? Because we often hear that there is concern that because policy impact isn't quite as strong, that these processes might backfire and that citizens end up losing even more trust. How do you see the policy impact in this space?
From my perspective, what I try to do is defend the ideas of citizens' assemblies that we organize in the Brussels Parliament, and that's tricky. Because you have to translate it to bills, which takes a lot of time. Marie is there, she co-wrote one of our resolutions, and that took an enormous amount of time because you need to put it in legal language, you need to find all sorts of extra like academic sources, etc., to sort of justify what you want to obtain as a policy issue. So that's a tricky part. But let's say that you have personnel for that, you have staff for that within Parliament, for example. Still, then the policy impact is very limited nowadays for these deliberative committees, notably, because they're not binding. And the effect that that has is depends on what objective you have. And that's actually something interesting, that when we instituted these deliberative committees in Brussels, as far as I know, no one really, or Parliament at least, did not adopt an objective behind it. We did not say we do this because of that. Well, we said we do this because there's a lack of trust in political instances, so let's bring the citizens and politicians closer together. But we did not say, let's have the citizens make the policy. That's the objective, that's the goal. And if that's not the goal, it's very hard to go and measure whether you've obtained it or not.
Right.
And it's also, the entire thing is not necessarily designed to do that. And so my personal appreciation of it is that today, yes, these deliberative committees and other things, because on a municipal level you have similar things, they help to bring people, randomly selected citizens and political decision makers closer together. They help for these people that have been randomly selected to comprehend the complexity of political decision making and all of the issues at stake and the limits that there are, and there are many limits. So yes, that for that objective, yes, it helps. But does it make better policy? For me, that's my personal goal, and I think it's much lacking there.
Currently.
Because these recommendations are not binding. You've been to the homeless one. There's like 6.5 million square meters of abandoned space in Brussels. There's about 7,000 people living on the streets. We can each give them 1,000 square meters. That's quite a lot. And that's one of the recommendations of this panel. And of course, it's not that easy. But still, it's a lot of space and much more could be done. And it's not happening. So it really depends, like, does it work? Depends on what do you want to work?
Right.
What do you want to achieve?
How do you define success?
Yes. Yes, exactly. And I think
Thank
if it's
you.
in terms of making better policy, I think there's a long way to go.
Thank you so much for that perspective. We do have some time, so can we open it up to the audience, please? And then we'll come back for some closing remarks. Yes, please. I don't know if there's a mic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Daniela from Democracy International. I have a question that might be actually for all three of you. I'm wondering about the interconnectedness or use of also other instruments following the deliberative exercises in your different cities or towns. Has there been, for example, like a inspiration of different movements, maybe like citizens' initiatives? In Switzerland, for example, we know that there's really lively culture of direct democracy and citizens' initiative rights. Has there been, for example, like a citizens' assembly that has then triggered a citizens' initiative, which is then going to just add another layer of pressure, of course, on decision makers? Has there been any examples of this in your town, maybe with petitioning instruments?
Do you want to go ahead? Frank? Go ahead.
Well, yes, or a little bit. Actually, yesterday we voted in the Brussels Parliament in a committee. We voted on a bill that would allow for a non-binding direct democracy instrument. So it's like a votation in Switzerland, but it's non-binding. So it's a citizens' consultation, it's what it's called. And I had actually already proposed a bill 4 years ago, but since we were waiting on a majority bill, it was sort of on the back of the pile. And in the bill I proposed, it was indeed the idea that these deliberative committees could propose a citizens' consultation. And that if one were to be held, one-off citizens panel would be drafted to write an information leaflet, the Citizen Initiative Review method, which comes from Oregon in the US, but is also used in Switzerland sometimes. And then if in the end Parliament does not ratify the idea of the vote, so say the majority of people vote yes, but Parliament votes no, then Parliament has to institute a deliberative committee. If like politicians say no, but the people say yes, then let's sit around and let's try to find a solution. That was our idea. Now in the bill that was voted yesterday, unfortunately none of these deliberative elements have been implemented. Only the last one was retained as an option. So Parliament can institute a deliberative committee if they vote against the outcome of the consultation. Baby steps, I think.
Thank you, Pepen. Frank, would you like to?
In Aachen, it is only the first step from a few more, I think. Citizen assemblies are a good tool to get in touch with the citizens, but it's what we need is more communication with the politicians and with the administrations. And I think it can help to put it through citizen assemblies, but it's only one part of the making better democracy in it all. You need more communication between the politicians. I think it's a really good way you do here in Brussels, and it means also that there's a little bit less don't know the English word. You make it a little bit less independent if you go with the politicians. We've talked it over with some of the people in the town hall, and to say we won't get so much pressure on you. We want that you get to your results and your recommendations without us. But I think we need, and that's not my way, it's only my way, I think we need them too, because it don't work without any politicians. That's my way.
And yes, maybe if I want to add something about this, maybe there in Switzerland is twofold. I think what you mentioned is really true about this citizen initiatives where someone can propose, and if there is 100,000 signatures, then there is a right to vote in Switzerland for this proposal. However, it is not that easy to collect the signatures, and sometimes yes, hard to go through that process. However, with those women's session that I did like 3 years ago now, all the proposals that we had were collected by the political commission and then brought to the parliament. And this is how the motions were voted, but through this process where the politicians took the proposals that we had. So it's not directly the parliament that chose to have a deliberative process, as you said. So baby steps, they realize that it's really useful to have something. And for example, with the Youth Assembly, now we have the report about the mental health that says that there is an issue and potential solutions that can be used. And for example, with what I imagine is that when, like in 5 years, we have an initiative, a citizen initiative about mental health, then we can use this report saying there is a deliberative process that says there is those solutions, well, those solutions exist.
Thank you for that. Is there another question? We do have time for another one. Anyone? Che.
Thank you very much for this. Really interesting. Also, I wonder, do you have any, like from the public, basically, how much is this trusted, like your assemblies or like your form of randomized selection? Is this something people look to and trust to the process? Do you have any? It doesn't need to be data, maybe also from the personal experience.
Do you mean in terms of the participants who are
No.
who join, or the more
like
general
your
public?
friends, your circle of friends, or maybe even the public, if there is any data on it, like if there is any representative data?
Who would like to go first, Manu?
Well, really quickly, I think that's the main issue with those processes, because if you don't put much effort into making this process perfect, then all the recommendations that you have in the end are just going not to be taken seriously and just going to be thrown away. So that's the key point, and I think this is also why currently we need to put some extra effort on making the process really robust and solid and ensure that it is going to be trusted. Otherwise, everything goes away and the work is really useless.
I would say it's last year it was the first citizen assembly in Aachen, and it was the best one we have ever. So the next one would be better. It's a ongoing developing, and if you put it in the heads from the different actors, that's quite okay. But you should not do the fault to say this is the right and this is forever the best. It would not be this. And that if you be so open, you've got the trust from the politicians, you've got the trust from the society. I think that's the only way.
Yeah, I would add on that the trust from the general population in these types of processes, I think, can come from, or need to come from, at first, visibility of the process. It needs to be seen, and there's a tension there, because of course if you put a lot of cameras on these like randomly selected citizens, they're not quite used to it, and it might be detrimental to the quality of the deliberation. But still, you need to make it visible somehow, and you need to make that connection, and you need to show like, hey, there's people that are discussing about this, and they're not just saying anything. They've been informed, they're really discussing, and well, it's very different from a parliamentary debate where people are just basically often, not always, but shouting at each other and trying to portray their point of view rather than to change and to find a common interest solution. That's one thing, the visibility. The second thing is, I think the best advocate for these processes is their outcome and the implementation of the outcome. If we can say, well, take Ireland, we've mentioned the Irish Constitutional Convention earlier. If today people from the same gender can get married in Ireland, that's in a way a real outcome from this convention, even if it's been ratified through referendum. The referendum being, by the way, the really big connection between the sort of mini public and the big public. And so there you have the real outcome, which is a great advocate for the process. And I think as long as the outcomes remain sort of floating around there somewhere, that's hard to do. But here we have a real example.
Thank you. I think Frank has given us a new standard. You design and implement for the best, but with an eye of always improving. Thank you for that. I have certainly learned a lot from the three of you, but I'd like to ask a final question and ask you each to maybe reflect on any takeaways that you are going to sort of take with you from this conversation that we've had, something you've heard from another panelist or from the audience that made an impression on you. Manu, do you want to start?
I can say. I would say, well, I learned a lot. I was really interested by what you said on the connecting people together and connecting those two worlds together. And I also like this idea of how do we measure the success, and how do we measure that, and how do we say that we are implementing the right policies and really having an impact. And I think this binding of, and not just having some things floating around, and I really like this idea, and I think it's really interesting to think of it.
Thank you for sharing that. Tapen, Frank?
Yeah, sure. I really think, Manon, what you said about the communication that is key is super important. And I think it's all too often overlooked. We look at the participants of the process, we want to design a really good process, but we forget to communicate about its existence or about its outcomes. And then it's been very nice for the 30 or 50 or 100 people that were invited. But if we want to make a bigger impact, we need to really make it visible and have this communication. And that's where I think what you have said a few times, Frank, is that you need the politicians also to be on board. And I think this is also maybe a way to get them on board, to also make them visible. And the best way to get a response from a politician is to shove a camera in his face or her face and ask them a question which only can be answered with yes, like, do you trust the citizens, for example? Maybe we need to do that just much more.
Thank you. Yes, it is not new for me, but the way to speak and communicate with politicians is, I think, our next step. I'm not sure if it's the same way like you like to put it together, citizen assemblies and politics, but there has to be a free space to do this, and we have to create this. And that's what I think I can get it home to Aachen.
Well, thank you to the three of you for joining us for this panel. Thank you. And I think we have a break, and then the workshops will be next. And I'm just looking out. There will be signs for where the different workshops are. All right, well, enjoy the break. Hello, can everybody hear me? Can we please gather back because we don't have our speaker for very long. Please come. Can we please gather around and begin this last session? Can I please ask everyone to come and join us so that we can start this last session? Our final speaker has to leave by 5:30. Please. Should I start? All right, well, we'll start because we don't want to lose our final speaker who has to leave us by 5:30. So I hope everyone enjoyed their workshops. It is an absolute honor to introduce and welcome the President of the French-speaking Parliament of Brussels, Kalvin Soiresse Njall, today. While you were in your workshops, I had the incredible privilege of spending some time having a conversation with Kalvin. Incredible life. Kalvin was born in Togo to a Cameroonian father and a Belgian mother of Togolese origin. He is a Belgian politician, a member of Ecolo, president of the French-speaking Brussels Parliament, as I mentioned, and member of the Parliament of the Brussels Capital Region, and municipal councillor in Ganchoren. Kalvin's story is closely linked to migration and exile. His father was an activist for the independence of Cameroon within the Union of Populations of Cameroon and fled Cameroon in 1970. He arrived in Europe, and then he went to Togo, where he met Kalvin's mother. Kalvin studied in Togo until the end of secondary school and began 2 years of law at the University of Lomé. After unrest shook the University of Lomé, he then moved to Belgium in 2004, where he continued his law studies at Saint-Louis University. He obtained a law degree in 2007. He then studied political science at the Free University of Brussels and graduated in 2009. Kalvin was first a journalist. He worked with the BBC and as a contributor to the Belgian magazine Wilfred and the Revue Politique. Between 2013 and 2019, Kalvin taught in upper secondary schools. In 2012, he co-founded the Colonial Memory and Fight Against Discrimination Collective. This collective brings together associations and personalities working on citizenship in Belgium, Pan-Africanism, memory, and decolonization. He began his political career at the municipal level in 2018 when he became a municipal councillor in Ganchoren for the Ecolo Party. In 2019, he was elected deputy of the Parliament of the Brussels Capital Region and the Parliament of the Wallonia-Brussels Federation, where he's responsible for matters related to education, equal opportunities, and decolonization. He also follows issues related to ecological transition and extractivism of raw materials and the links between ecology and decolonial issues. In 2023, he became president of the French-speaking Brussels Parliament, replacing Magali Plovy. And if that's not enough, Kalvin is also the author of 3 books. Please join me in welcoming Kalvin to the stage.
Thank you very much, Marjan. It was a great pleasure to discuss with you before this speech. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's a big honor for me to deliver this speech in front of you, working for the renewal of the democracy. It's very important for Europe and for the world to... okay. Is it better? Okay. Yeah, I was telling you that it's very, very important for Europe and the world to work about these topics because, you know, we are in a dangerous time, I think. We are facing a big challenge, a democratical big challenge here in Europe. And we know that young people are looking for a strong leader like Putin. We are looking at in some polls, young people are telling us that we don't like your democracy because it's complex, it's not direct, and I think it's very, very important to work on it, and your work is very, 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 very essential for our society. Just a stone's throw away from where we stand here lies the captivating allure of Mini Europe, a theme park showcasing miniature replicas of renowned European landmarks. Yet, what truly distinguishes Brussels apart from the Atomium, you know, the Atomium, traffic jams, the mannequin piece, the Grand Place, Stromae, and people who love football, the Union Saint-Gilloise, you know, and the non-official capital of deliberative democracy with its 2 permanent assemblies is its embodiment of a miniature world at every street corner, a testament to its status as the 2nd most cosmopolitan city globally, behind Dubai, with a staggering 184 nationalities coexisting harmoniously within its borders. The model of deliberative committees established in Brussels in 2020 by my predecessor, Magali Plovi, some of you know her. She is now judge in the Constitutional Court, bringing together 45 randomly selected citizens alongside 15 parliamentarians, transcends its designation as merely a Brussels-based mixed assembly. Instead, it emerges as a microcosm of global representation, echoing the diverse tapestry of perspectives and voices found within the intricate fabric of our interconnected world. This unique assembly mirrors the essence of a miniature global parliament where individuals from various backgrounds and walks of life converge to deliberate on matters of collective importance, embodying the spirit of inclusive governance of a miniature scale. Thus, one of the initial battles of the lengthy struggle for the establishment of this global first was to broaden participation not only to Brussels citizens, those with the right to vote, but all the residents of our region, totaling over 1 million inhabitants. Hence, from the day after registration in one of Brussels' 19 districts, it is possible to receive one of the, by now already 60,000 letters sent to the 6 deliberative committees to co-create the policies of this city region and become a fully fledged citizen. In Brussels, according to the available data, over 300,000 foreign residents do not have the right to vote. And I expect personally that they will have this right in the coming years. It's very, very important for the democracy. And they represent 1 in 3 inhabitants. Integrating them into deliberative committees provides an opportunity to give voice to reality that is all too often overlooked due to lack of political access. To truly involve these individuals, we draft invitation letters, not only in the official languages. You know, in Brussels, we have 2 official languages, French and Dutch, but also in the 5 most spoken languages in Brussels. Furthermore, someone who doesn't speak French or Dutch can attend accompanied by a buddy whose mission is to assist the participant in actively engaging with the committee. Indeed, it's one thing to have citizens present from diverse backgrounds, not only in terms of origin, but also in terms of gender, age. We have, for example, from 16 years old and educational level. But it's another to create conditions that allow everyone to participate equitably. That is why Magali has put so much of herself into establishing all these guidelines, favoring the inclusion of everyone in this process. I have had the privilege of participating in one such deliberative committees focused on vocational training. And I emerged from it with a conviction stronger than ever that the future of democracy lies in its citizens. It's only through their active engagement that we can hope to address the myriad challenges confronting us in a just and inclusive manner. By ensuring representation from various demographics, including different socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnicities, genders, ages, and perspectives, these committees can better reflect the complex needs and concerns of the broader population. Diversity in decision-making enriches discussions, leading to more comprehensive solutions that address the multifaceted challenges faced by the society. It promotes equity and fairness by preventing the marginalization of certain groups and ensures that decisions made are more representative of the collective interest of the community. Inclusion is not merely a theoretical concept, but a lived reality, woven into the fabric of our everyday experiences. It is found in the quiet determination of a father and son, in the role of the whisperer, buddy, attending every session of deliberative committee to help amplify his father's voice. It resonates in the transformative journey of reserved teenagers blossoming into confident leaders within their deliberative groups, empowered to envision themselves as future deputies after their first taste of parliamentary engagement. You know, the young men and women who came first, they came in the parliament, they are shy, you know, and progressively they become confident, and they are more confident, and they can tell a deputy, I'm not in accord with what you are saying. I don't agree with you. And I think in normal life, they can't have this confidence. And it's why the deliberative committees are very, very important for the citizenry here in Brussels and in all the countries. I think that it's very, very important that inclusion translates concretely also into, for example, into a single mother being able to leave her 13-month-old daughter at the children's workshop provided by the Parliament, enabling her to fully engage with her mind in the process. Inclusion is the tender exchange between individuals from diverse backgrounds as they share their stories, their hopes, and their dreams, transcending barriers of language and culture to find common ground. But, and I emphasize the but, inclusion goes hand in hand with real political impact, including without taking into account the recommendations is like trying to solve the current ecological crisis through gardening, to paraphrase the Brazilian philosopher Felipe Correa. After 6 deliberative committees, the challenge posed by the diversity and inclusion of parliamentarians in the process is a major success. The first committees were necessary for fine-tuning and truly understanding the role that parliamentarians should occupy in this work, which is neither that of a silent observer trying to assert themselves at the time of voting on recommendations by introducing amendments, nor that of someone who takes up a lot of space and tries to impose themselves through their expertise. No, the parliamentarian is a participant like any other who possesses powerful levers to implement the recommendations. I think of this anecdote from the chief of staff of the former French Minister of Participation, Olivier Véran, who confused randomly selected citizens with parliamentarians during a session of the Crisis Management Deliberative Committee. I understand that the question of parliamentary involvement is the subject of heated debates. Jonathan told me that in your circle. Let's see what the primary stakeholders, the citizens, think about this in light of the evaluation report of the first 6 deliberative committees. What do we observe there? More than 97% of citizens view it positively to have been able to participate with political decision makers in the deliberative committees. Near about 80% of randomly selected citizens believe that the presence of parliamentarians has contributed to the smooth running of the discussions and has enriched the content of the discussions. I oppose this fallacious argument that removing parliamentarians from the process would abolish power dynamics. Our society is rife with power dynamics, and it's important to clearly establish them so that they can be addressed. And it's important to clearly establish them so that they can be addressed and mitigated as much as possible. In all pure citizens' assemblies, there are power dynamics because, unfortunately, our society is built on these structures. Random selection does not magically erase them. Despite a very high level of satisfaction, a super diverse participation, recognition of the added value of the presence of parliamentarians, and the dissemination of the deliberative committee model, not only in the French-speaking Brussels Parliament and the Brussels Regional Parliament, but also in the Walloon, recently in the Walloon Parliament, and even the Federal Parliament. Does this mean that the mission is accomplished and that we have reached our destination? No, far from it. We still have many challenges ahead of us. And I believe that with your help, with your expertise, we will be able to overcome them. I am particularly thinking about connecting the committees with the broader public, ensuring broader inclusion of those marginalized from democracy, advancing democracy in schools. It's very, very important for me as a former teacher. Implementing civic leave, evaluating scientifically the follow-up of the committee's recommendation. It might seem peculiar for a politician to advocate for increased citizen participation given the current dominant framework of representative democracy. However, it's crucial to recognize that representative democracy, as we know, today is a relatively recent development of far from being perfect. Therefore, as a politician, it is not only appropriate but imperative to advocate for increased inclusive citizen participation. We must embrace the rich tapestry of democratic traditions, drawing inspiration from the wisdom of the past and all the work and the experiences led by you and in this room and others around the world to shape the future of democracy. You know, we have many, many, many demands coming, for example, from Africa, from countries like Senegal, from countries like Cameroon, to have the deliberative committees too. By fostering empathy, understanding, and solidarity, by confronting injustice and addressing systemic inequalities, we can build a society where the light of compassion and progress shines brightly, casting out the shadows where monsters lurk. Let us stand together, shoulder to shoulder, in the pursuit of a better world for all. Thank you very much.
So with the elections coming up, how do you plan to continue your good work and the good work of Madame Plovy?
Now, I don't think she has the right to talk about anything in politics, because when you are judge in the Constitutional Court, you must be neutral. So I think in some informal discussions, she can continue giving me advice, but you know, my term is almost finished as president because we are having new elections on the 9th June, and I don't know if I will be president anymore. So we will see the results, but we are working with the other parties, political parties, to be sure that the deliberative committees will continue. It's very important for us to have the continuing of these processes because we have, as I said, we have very, very good results when we evaluate the participants of these committees. So sometimes we continuing meeting Magali, but not officially.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm curious to know whether the perception around the mixed committees is positive across different political parties, because you know, when we talk about deliberative democracy and so on, usually it's mostly, I would say, the left side of the spectrum, the progressives that are more politically open to this idea. The conservatives tend to be, unless it's fake, if I can say, deliberative democracy. So I'm curious to know whether by
because of your unique model, where politicians have a direct contact with citizens, and politicians are different. They are not only from the left or the progressive or the green, but also, you know, right wing or. So I'm curious to know whether you feel that there is a cross-party support on this methodology, or if in fact not really, and that maybe reply to the question about the future of this with the new parliament coming. Thank you.
Thank you. For this question is very crucial. The process of the deliberative committees is the result of, I think, the green parties who were open to the civil society. And I was, before I was elected, there were what we called the ecological laboratories in Verviers, in the German-speaking part, where there are also citizens' assemblies. We were there, and we were talking about how renewing our democracy. So the other political parties sometimes look at this process as a green process. But with the results, with the participation of the deputies of these parties, they are more convinced of the importance of these deliberative committees. Involving them in the process was very, very important, because now they are like, we can't go back. Even the liberals, you know, who are more conservative now in Belgium, they are not, for me, they are not liberals anymore on these topics, you know. And I think it will be very, very difficult for them to go back. And now we have in the administration of the parliament, in the text of the parliament, we have this tradition, we have this habit of organizing the deliberative committees. And we are working on the negotiation, you know, because in Belgium we always say that we have two times, you have the election, and after the election you have the negotiations. Now we are working on the terms of the negotiations, if we are in position to negotiate participation in the government. And I think we are looking, and sometimes, you know, it's very, very important also to be kind, to be open with those who are not convinced. And I think with this manner, they are more, they think and they feel that they are more involved in the process. And I think it's very, very important. But the young people who participate, for example, in this, in my deliberative committee, they were very, very happy at the end of the process. And for the, you know, for the other political parties, it's very difficult to tell them that we are going back. Yeah. And some of them, some of the political parties, some of the young people told us that, yeah, now I think I'm ready to be involved in politics. Some of our participants have some proposition coming from some political parties, you know. And I think it will be very, very difficult to go back.
That's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, last question. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question that kind of builds on that. It's about how do you see deliberative democracy becoming the new normal, in the sense that it is inherently about distributing power, whereas currently, as opposed to centralized power. So inevitably, you are stepping onto people their toes, as in...
I am...
Like when you are introducing deliberative democracy, it's distributing power as opposed to centralized power in current forms. So by doing this, you are stepping on people's toes that currently hold this power. given that a lot of these initiatives are financed by the institutes and bodies that currently hold this centralized power, how do you see this interaction between institutes like NGOs that push for this, or the institutes that drive this themselves, like we're seeing in Brussels? So do you, in the position that you are in, do you see like this struggle, that's, if the question is somewhat clear?
Yeah, I think there is a big discussion about the place of the, how can I say it, les corps intermédiaires, intermediary bodies like NGOs, like mutuals, like, you know, it's very important. I was in a debate where we were talking about the education, and we had there some NGOs, some associations who came and told me that your citizens' assemblies are too elitist, and you are not working to enrich our work on the field. And I think it's a big preoccupation, you know, for them. And they are like, yeah, the parliament is talking directly to the citizens, and it's like they are taking off our power, you know, and especially in the poor areas of Brussels. And it's why when I arrived as president with Jonathan, we worked on a topic, the people who are not involved in this, with this process, we have a very large diversity. But I think it's one of our future challenge is to work with those organizations who are in these poor areas to be sure that all people there know the deliberative committees, can practice this, not in the parliament, but in their areas, you know. And it's very important to work with this organization like NGOs, like associations, like all these organizations that are working there in those poor areas. It's very, very important to not confront the two initiatives, because they are feeling that they are becoming more weak because of these new processes. I think that we must work on it to reconciliate these two initiatives, because it enriches the society. And I think it's how I can answer you about this question. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for staying longer, and good luck with your debate. Thank you very much. All right, friends, our few hours of wonder and exploration is coming to an end. Thank you so much for being with us. Before we turn your attention to the much needed and much deserved drinks that are behind us, please join me in thanking all of our speakers, our panelists, our workshop leaders, as well as the FIDE team, Yves, Miguel, Hannah, and Nabila. Thank you so much for a wonderful afternoon.